Outside Nigeria now, South Africa's former president, Jacob Zuma, arrived at the Pietermaritzburg High Court on Friday for his third appearance on corruption charges relating to a $2.5 billion arms deal in the late 1990s. Zuma, who was ousted by the ruling party in February, faces 16 charges of fraud, racketeering and money laundering relating to a deal to buy European military hardware to upgrade South Africa's armed forces after the end of apartheid in 1994. For more on this, I have joining me via Skype from Johannesburg, the director at the Orwell Socio-Economic Research Institute, Angelo Fick. Thank you for joining me.
Good morning.
Good morning to you. Well, Zuma has denied any wrongdoing, and this is a rare case of an example of an African leader being held to account for his actions. What does this mean for accountability and integrity in African political leadership?
Well, I think what was important here was that Jacob Zuma was appearing in court during a period when South Africa was hosting the BRICS Heads of State Summit, the 10th one. And so present at this particular moment in South Africa were Vladimir Putin, who was seen as a major supporter of Jacob Zuma during his tenure as president, and now under Cyril Ramaphosa is continuing to engage with South Africa through the BRICS formation. Jacob Zuma, of course, as a former president standing up in court and having to account for these, is defiant and says that these charges will go away, and his lawyers are asking for a permanent stay of prosecution. The state, of course, has waited 10 years to do this because the charges were first dropped over 10 years ago. He had his presidency, 2 terms. He was removed from office by being asked by his own party to resign in February. And so we have the trial proceeding. I think it sets a precedent, not just in South Africa, but across the continent, that former heads of state are not necessarily beyond prosecution. And we're seeing similar kinds of moves in places like Angola, where the new president is taking on what the regime sees as corruption from his predecessor.
Indeed. Well, dozens of Zuma supporters held an overnight vigil in the city just before his appearance in court. They were chanting support for him. What difficulties do you think the court faces when some believe he's a victim of a politically motivated witch hunt?
Mr. Zuma himself says this and indicates that at some point, not now, in the future, he will reveal how that conspiracy is constructed against him. But what is interesting is that the numbers of people outside the court are decreasing. Let's not forget this is not the first time that Jacob Zuma has to appear in court. He did so in a trial for rape in the last decade, which he was acquitted of. And there were thousands of people outside the court and thousands of rallies around the country. This time around, the numbers have dwindled, and it's interesting to see who is there outside of the court with him. It is the man who was perhaps the most controversial appointment as Minister of Finance, Des van Rooyen, who has since been sacked from the cabinet altogether. It is Carl Niehaus, a man of no small controversy. Supporting Mr. Zuma. We know that the African National Congress has indicated that its members should not be there in their official capacity. And so Mr. Zuma's, I think, many people see this as his last and rather desperate attempt at making these charges go away. And chances are that they won't go away precisely because the Ramaphosa government faces re-election in 2019, and they want to be seen by the electorate as doing the job of what they say is rooting out corruption in South Africa.
Well, this is all in a bid to fight corruption. And Zuma's successor, Cyril Ramaphosa, has made the fight against corruption a top priority as he seeks to woo foreign investment and revamp an already ailing economy. What do you think his chances are?
Well, there are many, many difficulties. So we know that from the BRICS summit, for example, that the idea that the BRICS formation would somehow revitalize South Africa's economy isn't proving quite as quick and easy a solution as many imagined. The Minister of Trade and Industry, Rob Davies, announced with Xi Jinping present on the stage that foreign direct investment between BRICS countries only accounted for 6% of the trade in these countries. And so the majority of BRICS countries' trade still comes from outside of the BRICS formation. Cyril Ramaphosa's own Minister of Public Works, the former Finance Minister Pravin Gordhan, who is also seen as a major knight in the fight against corruption, announced that the energy giant Eskom, which is the sole provider of electricity in South Africa, have been, engaged in irregular expenditure to the tune of 540 billion naira. Just over the last few years. And so there are real concerns about the ways in which what in South Africa was still called state capture, the abuse of state-owned enterprises to enrich a small group of people, will be able to be reversed soon enough for it to matter for the Ramaphosa government in the 2019 general election. So Mr. Ramaphosa has a really, really big ask ahead of him, and this includes having to draw foreign investors to a country where the large state-owned enterprises are seen to be so deeply, deeply flawed, corrupt, and possibly failing.
Well, Jacob Zuma was described as a cat with 9 lives when he was the president. Let's just see how far this takes him now. Angelo Fick, Director, AWAL Socio-Economic Research Institute, thank you for joining me on TVC News.
Thank you.